Hello, and welcome to Politics and Prose. My name is Grant, and I'm a bookseller here where we host in-person events, trips, and classes. Tonight, I'm excited to welcome Jon Hickey with his new book, Big Chief. Jon Hickey earned his MFA at Cornell University and was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. He has received scholarships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Suwannee Writers Conference, and he is an enrolled member of the Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. His short fiction has appeared in Massachusetts Review, Gulf Coast Online, Virginia Quarterly Review, Meridian, and the Madison Review. In his new book, Big Chief, Hickey tells the story of Mitch Caddo, a young law school graduate and aspiring political fixer, while he navigates his reservation's most recent election, which puts the whole reservation on the verge of chaos. Big Chief tells an unforgettable story about the search for belonging, to an ancestral and spiritual home, to a family, and to a sovereign people at a moment of great historical importance. I had the honor of reading an early copy of the book, and it's truly exceptional. Hickey will be in conversation with Ian Shapira. Shapira has been a staff writer at the Washington Post since 2000. He was on the Post team that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2008 for the paper's coverage of the Virginia Tech mass shooting. His recent stories on racism, sexism, sexual assault, and hazing at the Virginia Military Institute won a George Polk Award from Long Island University and the Paul Tobikin Award for reporting on discrimination from Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Jon Hickey and Ian Shapira.
Hey, everybody.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Enormous crowd tonight. It's great to see everybody.
Yeah, no, they're all the way to the back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out. I think I'm in the world of nonfiction, but at the Washington Post. But I read a lot. I mostly read fiction, and I guess one of my takeaways from this book, one of the reasons I like reading fiction so much, is that it can transport you to places. And I think there's so many places, there's so many entry points into talking about this book, but place to me and location is very, very important. Whenever I'm thinking about writing even a story with the Post, or whenever I'm wanting to pick out one of those books down there in the new fiction, I think about where am I going to, what flight am I taking to, and so anyway, I just wanted to say that from the outset, and we can get into place in a second. In many ways, the plot of Big Chief is fairly straightforward. Will Mack Beck, the tribal president of Passage Rouge Indian Reservation in the North Woods of Wisconsin, beat Gloria Hawkins in his reelection campaign for tribal president. Fairly straightforward. Something you might read about in your local paper here. The book is told in the first person from the point of view of Mitch Caddo, a 30-year-old wunderkind politico who was sort of a consigliere or aide de camp to Mack, his childhood friend, but he's also the youngest ever operations director for the Passage Rouge Nation of Lake Superior
Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe, thank you. A tribe of about 5,000 enrolled members. As the plot unfolds, the rivals try excavating as much dirt on each other to secure a victory. It's a beautiful but sad place with drug trafficking, a drunk tank at full occupancy on weekends, and violence by the low-income homes near the casino. And I wanted to ask you at the outset, can you just talk to folks tonight about the origin of this great story? How did you, I wanted to hear about the origin of it, like how you got the idea, and then if you could connect that to sort of the larger, maybe story you were trying to tell about this particular Native American experience that you were, the one you were trying to seek to tell.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for coming out again. I've always been writing something that's close to the subject, short stories or novel attempts. I've tried to get into this, but for whatever reasons, it never quite gelled until 2016. And I don't know what was happening around that time, elections or that sort of thing. But I started writing this one in earnest, and for some reason something was clicking, and I don't think I was able to exactly articulate why that was. But in retrospect, it was the fusing of the subject that I've long been fascinated by, I've been observing the politics on, let's say, the Lac du Flambeau Reservation or the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota or Red Lake, all the various nations around that area.
So you were becoming like sort of immersed in reading about those
Yeah.
Stories out in real life. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
Wow,
because
okay.
it's all fascinating. A few years ago, my tribe was going through quite a bit of turmoil, and it was quite alarming to see from afar because I live in San Francisco now, and there was nothing I could do, because we don't have absentee voting. I wasn't able to make it out there for that sort of thing, but the things that were happening with the elections or the government there, had some sort of effect on me, right? This was my nation, right? I'm a citizen of this nation, and so I was watching these things and I became more immersed in it, and seeing how these things were playing out on other reservations, but also I was fusing it with this idea because 2016, not just certain elections that might have happened around that time, but my son was born then, my first son. I have two, and what I realized was that due to the blood quantum rules and that sort of thing, he was eligible to be a citizen as well, and he is.
Yeah.
But I realized that he would not have the same connection to the place that I had. I never lived on the reservation, but my family is very deeply entrenched over there. So we would, visit there, quite often. But being in San Francisco, my son will not maybe have the same,
Got it.
sense of connection. And when I realized that, what I realized about that was that I'm looking at the very end result of the termination policies of the last century. That we've become dispersed. That unless he has a child with another tribal member, then blood quantum wise.
Yeah, it's over.
We've kind of exactly, and something about those two things coming together just seemed to make sense, and I started working on this in earnest.
So it was a combination of seeing real political scandals and turmoil in the paper, in whatever press you were reading, about what was going on in your home nation, and then also just this longing to sort of these feelings about your own son, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. How it affected me personally, and I mean it's fascinating stuff. It's just this legal frontier where there's so many gray zones. There's so many there's so many implications about the relationships between the tribes and the federal government.
So when you set about when you have this idea to write like a sort of a political thriller, so to speak. Thriller, it typically is a genre term. This book is clearly not that, but it's about a political race, and it's compressed time. It's a week, right?
Yeah, very.
And were you traveling out to the North Woods of Wisconsin? Were you? I'm just curious. Like, walk us through your reporting. Not reporting, but your research and your writing style here. How did you sort of pull this together, basically? How did you summon the authority and the expertise to write about that?
That's a great question. A lot of it is really based on observations I've made of people I know personally who have gone into government. Cool. Not just Lac du Flambeau, but the other places as well. My uncle was a wonderful person. I see where we're being we're being recorded. He may be watching. He's had quite a bit of experience working in the government, and he often told me, that there's a good book here, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. and then I wrote. Exactly, as all uncles do.
Yeah, exactly.
But that just leads to the other thing. Because you see, I feel like the tribes have been in the news a lot. Especially in the last few years. Especially we were talking about disenrollments, banishments, those hot button issues are kind of making their way to the forefront a little bit.
Issues that have that are at the center of your book.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wait, so for folks out here who may not understand, can you just walk people through very quickly just the subject of disenrollment and blood quantum, just to make sure people are on the same page?
I mean, it depends on which tribe or nation you're talking about, but the way that it works is that the tribes, they determine their membership, and it's based on different things depending on the tribe. You can go by lineage, or you could go by blood quantum. You go by who's on the census back in 1920, or back even further than that. But what you see, especially in the last few years, is that there are some governments that have been disenrolling people and removing them from the rolls, and for various reasons. And more often than not, you see it used as a political weapon.
Yeah.
And when I encountered that, or when I was reading that, I couldn't imagine I couldn't imagine something that really hits at the heart of your identity than to take away that part of you, that belongingness. Just this sort of I don't know, like it just seems like something that would be so devastating.
And the incentive for a tribal nation to disenroll someone, what their theory is, what exactly?
In some cases, you can eliminate a political rival that way. A whole faction. So oftentimes, these elections are family versus family.
Yeah.
That's one way you can just eliminate that one family, is you go into the records, you find that one relative that might not, you can posthumously disenroll them, and then all of a sudden you've eliminated this whole faction.
The whole group, yeah.
There are other reasons. Another one could be that you're limiting the number of per capita checks that are going out. The tribe provides assistance, or
it's a way to preserve money.
Or space, like
Exactly.
tribal housing.
Exactly.
That's a way to deny people tribal housing or just benefits.
Yeah.
Like I said, like it really strikes at the heart of that identity. And
well, I was saying that my next question was just about race in general. It's a huge component of the novel, and the main character speaks with a lot of bluntness about race, and he describes himself as a mixed race, white passing face of Passage Rouge, where he's the consigliere to the guy running for president, but he's the guy that is the sort of interacts with the white people, basically.
Right.
And there's
exactly.
a term for that, which I'm forgetting now in the book.
Wait, which term are we talking about?
The Native American. I think it's a Native American term for white people that's constantly invoked. I'm forgetting.
Shamokamanad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna mess. I didn't want to mess that up.
All right.
But the funniest part is that the main character is constantly cites the fact that people mock him for being a J. Crew Indian. So I kept on imagining like the J. Crew Native American catalog. Or something.
Yes, with the nice clothes.
I just thought it was a really funny amalgamation.
Yeah.
And anyway, so so carrying on with this race is that the main character, again, his mentor is a guy named Joe Beck, who is also the adoptive father of the guy running for President Mack. Joe is this white guy, general counsel of the tribal nation, and he gets in trouble himself in the book. He lives in this enormous lakeside home, but in a strange twist, even though he's the adoptive father of the guy running for president, he's actually supporting the other person running for president, Gloria Hawkins. And anyway, so this got to my question about race, which was why you chose so deliberately to talk so bluntly about race in this book. What was and maybe we've already answered it with these questions of blood quantum, but I just wanted to ask you just what were the tensions that you were trying to illuminate from real life with those discussions about his own sort of paranoia, anxiety about his own racial complexion, and then
Right.
anyway, he's always the noting of people's race is constantly out there.
Yeah, definitely. At its heart, I mean, I started this book, thinking about the politics and thinking about power and how power works on the reservation. But as I was drafting it, there were certain shifts, and one of them was it felt more like a novel about belongingness.
Yeah.
And in this specific instance, that belongingness is often determined by that, the tribal membership, but also just like the surfaces. Do you look like you fit in? And that's what you're referring to when he puts Mack up as his sort of proxy for power, because Mack looks like
Yeah.
what you would expect, a Passage Rouge Indian would look like. And yeah, I mean, not just the narrator, but everybody else is also, very concerned with the surfaces.
Yeah.
That we're just constantly, not just, how you look, but how you talk. Do you speak the language? Do you speak it with that accent, that res accent?
Yeah.
So we're paying a lot of attention to the surfaces. And I mean, I think that's what it is that, that one of the questions that I had as you bring up Joe's a white man. Joe's a white man that has sort of insinuated himself into the power structure of this place. He's the mentor, but he also, wields a lot of power. And I think one of the questions, I don't think it's an implied question. I think I actually asked the question in the book, is, well, how much does he belong to the place?
Yeah.
And are we answering that question based on his enrollment status? Are we, or the color of his skin, right? Or where he comes from. He comes from the East, right?
Right.
He is not from this area, but he has also, made himself important in this area.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons why that figures so much in the book. Just because it's getting at the attention of who determines who belongs.
Power, whenever you're writing a book, a novel like this, you've got a whole cast of characters in the book, and you have to decide how big that cast is going to be, and you have to also think about how they all clash and interconnect with each other and intersect. And what makes this book so interesting to me are the sort of incestuous has sort of a negative pejorative vibe to it. I don't like that term, but I'm going to use it anyway. Because I think it clearly gets across what I'm trying to say here, which is just that Joe is the adoptive father of Mack and his sister Layla, who used to be married to Mack's police chief, Bobby Lone Eagle, and who also works for Gloria, and who once hooked up with the main character, Mitch. And I guess what I'm wondering from a craft point of view is, when you were drafting early drafts of this book, and when you were sketching all this out, what made that web of people being so interconnected, what made that so appealing to you as a writer, as a way to hook readers in, as a way to not only create a world, but as a way to create great drama?
Well, I think the word I would use would be claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Well, it has the connotations that maybe you're now going for here, but claustrophobic. That everything, it all takes place on this small reservation, right? It would say like 5,000 people. It's a small town and it's remote. And there's only a couple of roads that go in and go out, and there's a lot at stake. So all the people there are just kind of kettled in to this small space, and they're all just going to bounce into each other, and that's just going to create friction. And on a craft level, I think that's what I'm thinking about. Like I have a lot of motivated people.
Yeah.
And they all got problems. They're all dealing with something, and you stick them into this remote sort of setting where they have strong feelings about the place. in a sort of push-pull way. Like Mitch is drawn to this place. He also kind of doesn't want to be there. In a lot of ways, like he's looked for his life outside of the reservation. He's kind of coming back here
That's right.
out of obligation, and yet, this it still hits him in the heart, right? His heart and soul is in this place. So you have a bunch of characters like that. As I started out, I was like, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Something contentious is going to happen. So
there were. I wanted to have you read just from a couple sections. We'll start just start with this one portion now, and then there's a second part I want you to read a little later, which I really like. If you could just start reading from like page 5, just for the page 5, and then the top of the next paragraph. This is like in the opening pages, and it'll give you all just a taste of what this book feels like, and if you just. That blue line, yeah.
Yeah, the blue line, okay. This is from the first part of the book. This is from the first chapter. And, on Thanksgiving morning, or rather feast day, because Mack decided Passage Rouge would not honor the colonialist origins of the holiday, the people of our mid-sized reservation line up along Peace Pipe Road, the main drag in town. They're in good spirits because we're handing out the annual per capita checks. 2 G's, double the usual amount thanks to our last-minute raid on the general fund. Credit cards and overdue rents are about to be paid off. Used cars and Christmas gifts are about to be bought. And on top of this, the first 50 tribal citizens in line get a free meal and a $20 casino voucher for a couple of spins inside. Are we buying votes or delivering on promises? Depends on whose camp you're in. I watch our constituents from the window of the Migazee suite on the top floor of the 4-story hotel, and Max sees them too, a wary, contemptuous look clouding the usual ursine friendliness of his face. He's going down there to dole out meals, hand out per capita checks, and remind them that in a week they're going to vote, and they ought to make the right choice, because although it's possible, even probable, that these same people will vote for regime change, which has the president feeling morose this morning. He hasn't said a word to me since I've come up to the suite. So I startle when he croaks, "Where the hell's Bobby Lone Eagle?" He's referring to our chief of police, who's fetching the president's ride, the big chief, from the car wash in town.
Yeah, that's great.
You read from the arc. The arc is different.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's all right. I was just going down memory lane. Yeah.
I didn't mean to traumatize you. So you got a good sense of the tone and the voice of Mitch there, and I think we were talking in the green room just about how much I like first person novels, and I always look for them, and so I was really glad when this felt to me, and I wanted to ask you, when you were writing this book and you were deciding which point of view, did you wrestle with writing it in the third person and having you or having there be an omniscient narrator, or did the first person, did Mitch as a first person narrator instantly come to you and you sort of embraced that from the start, and why did you feel like in the end that this was the best way to tell this particular story?
It's a great question. We have writers in the audience. It always feels like there's a big tension. We'll say something that makes somebody mad. This always felt like a first-person novel, and one of the reasons was the inspirations behind it. One of the reasons that the novel took a while was because I didn't know what I wanted it to look like. And, I cast about to find something that would, sort of give me an idea of what that would be. And that turned out to be All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I read that thing forward and backward. I lived inside of that book there was like a year where I read very little else but that book. And so there was that one, which is the obvious, analog, because it's about power, but it's also about the sort of nihilism, right? That the first person narrator has.
Yeah.
But the other reason that I loved that book, it's a book of its time, So you take it, as it is, right? It's written about Louisiana back in the 40s. So but there's an energy and a verve to that narrator, and there's a slickness that is covering for this void, this lack, and for whatever reason, that was what was resonating with me. The other book that figured into it was The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. So, so it's strange. It's a couple of guys from Louisiana from the mid-century, middle of last century, and for whatever reason, those first-person voices really captured me, and I felt like that was the way in. I think that the next one that I'm working on is going to be third person.
Mix it up.
I think I'm kind of sick of the I myself. Yeah. But
yeah, but I felt like and without knowing what your next book is about, and also knowing that writers never like talking about what their next book's going to be about, so I won't ask you.
Yeah.
But I will. I guess I wanted to say just that I agreed with your choice in this case, because I sort of felt like, when you have a cast of characters like this, where there's all these interconnections, it helps the reader and it helps propulsion. It helps with the propulsion of the novel to have that insider view in a book about a political scandal of some sort, and it feels like you're getting this like intimate window into something that you should not have access to, and that's sort of why I liked it a lot.
Yeah, and another way of going about it was that this guy's a politico, right? He's really involved with politics. He's a lawyer, and the way that I wanted to set it up was to have this somewhat unreliable narrator, who maybe becomes more reliable, hopefully by the end. But it's a book about a spiritual journey, and for whatever reason, the third person felt strange.
Yeah,
to have that voice, describe somebody else going through that. I mean, it happens. I know that it works, in other books, but for me, I couldn't fall into it. I tried. I did try.
Even though Mitch is the main character, Mack was also a very attractive character to me too. He was sort of a bully, but also funny. He's the tribal president running for election, and I felt like in that way, I felt like Mack in some ways defied convention. In some ways, he was just funny and acerbic, and I guess it made me wonder too. Just when you're writing about this subject, Native American politics, and you're writing within the sort of larger category of Native American, themes. How conscious were you of trying to, do something new, defy stereotypes or defy conventions within that genre, so to speak, of other people's books that have tackled this kind of subject?
Well, I mean, you might be able to tell from the cover and the title, Big Chief. Yeah. I've said this before, that as an indigenous writer. I've been doing this for a bit now. I've been writing stories and novel attempts for about 20 years.
Novel attempts count.
Yes, novel attempts do count. But all along, I see how indigenous writers are put out there, and the preconceptions and the expectations, and I always had this suspicion that they were going to put a feather on my book. And there it is, right there. Right there. I mean, it's nice, it's actually kind of understated. But, the thing is that, I titled this Big Chief, there's a few different reasons why. The literal reason, of course, is that Mack drives around, he's a big guy, but he drives around in the Big Chief, the white Ford truck, right?
That's right.
But it's also, a way for me to take those things head on, the preconceptions, And because I don't know what the preconception, if we're talking about tribal governance, let's say, or how politics and power works in, these nations, I don't know what the preconception is.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't think anybody really, like say wider, like it's not really thought about all that much. It hasn't been written about all that much.
Yeah, that's what I found so great about this.
Yeah, I mean, Louise Erdrich has, has talked about it explicitly in a couple of books. But I was definitely aware that, people are coming to this with preconceptions. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And, it mirrors what the characters are doing in the book itself. They're also looking at the surfaces. The hope is that you get under the surfaces. The hope is that you throw these things out there, so that they're said, so that, we're engaging with it, so that we know what we have. And that the reader picks up on the irony of some of it, right? The irony of a feather and the Thunderbird with card suits. And that big title, the big chief.
That's right.
So and in a way that mirrors, like how bring it back to Mack.
Yeah.
Who's one of my favorite characters of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he didn't start out that way,
No.
And what you're saying is that, like, maybe what I was trying to get out of it, which is that, you have this guy, you have your preconception about him. He's got his, image. He's wearing the ribbon shirt. He's wearing, the flat brimmed cap.
Yeah.
He's got swagger. Peeling back the layers throughout the book and finding out why he is the way he is was one of the, surprises for me.
Whenever you're writing a book, you have to sort of figure out how much backstory you include about the principal characters. And in the case of Mitch, the narrator, we learn that he's missing his parents. His mother. I'm not going to reel too much, but his mother dies in a car accident.
Oh wait, we found that out in the first paragraph, so it's okay. I think you're not spoiling it.
You can find that out right now.
Yeah.
And then the father has abandoned him as a child.
Yes, exactly.
And so he gloms onto Joe. I mean, he the rich guy by the lake, and who becomes a central figure himself because, again, slight plot spoiler. Joe, there's this incredible moment sort of in the midway through the book where Mitch is again working for Mack, the guy who's president. They go to Joe's home in the middle of the night and say, "We found that you've been embezzling from tribal funds, and you have 24 hours to leave."
Right.
And so
they're going to banish him.
And so there's this great moment where, here was the guy that raised them basically, and now they're so politically motivated that they're willing to not only kick him out, but give him 24 hours. And I just thought that to me is where I felt the backstory was of his missing his parents hovering over the current plot, where I sort of felt like if your parents are around, you would have thought twice about that, or I don't know. I was just thinking a lot about like his parents, like, wow, you've been cut loose.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're working off of a lot of resentments towards Joe, and as you say, they're politically motivated, and it does, the way events happen, they are brought to this testing point, and as you say, they fail that particular test.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess depending on how you define that. You were talking about backstory.
Yeah, just what to include, how much to include, and you do write about the mom and the accident, and that kind of reverberates throughout.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a bit about that actually, like how much of were you in earlier drafts or in the how were you wrestling with how much of that to include in the book?
That's a great question. Yeah, that was the subject of drafts 4 and 5. If I'm putting numbers on it, the draft that I gave to my agent was much longer. It was 400 pages. It was over 400 pages.
Wow.
And she read it, and she gave me some feedback, and she said, "Yep, it's got to be shorter." And I was like, "I figured you'd say that."
Yeah.
I was afraid you'd say that. So I went back to it. I went back, and the way that it was structured before was maybe more of a straight homage to All the King's Men.
Yeah.
And that meant that it was a sort of rise and fall, but also like this foregrounded action. And it was a lot of it in the past, linear, starting from way back when, and kind of watching him rise. But it was intercut with these chapters in the present day, taking place in an election. And what I ended up doing in that first rewrite was my agent asked me to cut a quarter, and I cut a half.
Wow.
I just just took it all out. And what was left were the chapters about this reelection campaign that was happening over this Thanksgiving period, because that was the most urgent part of the book. And I've been asked whether that was upsetting to just lose 200 pages, and it was, but it also really clarified things. It clarified what's at stake here, and what are the actual actions of it, rather than the backstory. So what I had was this giant mountain of backstory on this file. I can't remember what I called the file. It was just like, I think I just called it the pile. The pile of cut pages and misbegotten scenes and orphaned dialogue things, so I had this to draw from, and I think over the next few drafts, like maybe 3 or 4 drafts, we kind of figured out what's missing, what do we need, But there was this. It's the iceberg thing, right? This is the tip of the iceberg, and the rest of the iceberg is buried underneath.
Exactly, and and you're having to debate. Is this backstory effective in moving readers along, or is it like a drag? So you have to sort of.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So at this point in the Q&A, I always like to try to ask writers, about how their own path, how their personal lives might have shaped this. I know, in the brief things I did read about you, you grew up in Minnesota.
Yep.
You're from there, and you went to Cornell for graduate school, like the main character, although you didn't go to law school.
No, I did not go to law school.
You went to Cornell's very famous MFA program. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the question I had for you is just, did you grow up wanting to be a writer? You grew up, tell me where you grew up, and then were your parents, was this something you imagined doing one day? Or did you have other designs in life?
Good question. My grandfather wrote or wanted to be a writer, and succeeded at having a sort of writing lifestyle sort of thing.
That's pretty cool.
He had his library, and he wrote, and he never got that published. And I think that maybe I internalized that a little bit, like, finish what he did. And
got it.
but I didn't really know him very well. I don't think I really started doing it seriously until college. I was just in Milwaukee, and I saw my old professor from there, and I was taken to task for not putting in my bio that I went to UW-Madison. They're kind of mad at me, so I need to say that. Yeah, I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, their creative writing department. They had a very robust undergraduate program over there, and there's my friend from UW-Madison who's. Yeah, we met in workshop, exactly. Yeah, and it was this thing where it sort of caught on. I didn't start reading really widely until college, and to see what was possible, what you could do with fiction, what I wanted to do. I think, but by the end of college, I knew that I wanted to go to an MFA program, so I went directly to the MFA program for better or worse. There's a lot of life to be lived, and I think I did a lot of growing up around that time as well. And then after that, I went to the Stanford, the Stegner program up there. So yeah, I don't think those things crystallized until maybe a little bit later, like in my education, I think.
Got it. Okay, so I wanted just to have you read just 2 paragraphs of a scene. I mentioned the narrator's relationship with Joe, the rich guy, and then we'll do Q&A after that.
Great.
And we'll go from there. But I think these 2 paragraphs really, to me, are at kind of, for me at least, I'm not saying for anybody else, but just for me at least, these 2 paragraphs really, for me, were so emblematic of your talent as a writer and as also your ability to sort of put me in a place and make me feel something. And I think that is always the goal of any writer. And again, this is the main character looking back on his friendship and relationship with Joe. And you can just read these 2 paragraphs. Right?
Great. Night of the Living Ark.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Can I say too that now that I see it, these were the ones that I really worried over.
Oh, really?
These passages. There are certain parts of the book where it took months. It took months to really, and I was still editing them, in the final pass pages.
Yeah.
And then there are parts that did not take very long at all. And guess which parts the agent really liked. But this is one of my favorites, if I'm allowed to have favorites. Joe and I would paddle out in the dark, the fog still hanging lazily over the gently rippling water, and we'd return to the pier in the heat of the afternoon. He knew the best spots. He was as good as any of the fishing guides on the res. I didn't even like fishing. I never caught a walleye or a muskie or anything bigger than a sunfish or a rock bass, which was fine by me, as I hated when their dorsal fins opened up like serrated switchblades whenever I tried to grab one and rip it off my hook. Sometimes I'd just toss in a bare hook and watch the bobber float along the glassy surface, and when the fish didn't bite, Joe would say, "Reel it in slow. You have to leave him to the boat, brother." He would give me that smile that was already lined and wrinkled, a premature old age, and I would do as told and pray that my line wouldn't find one of those damned rock basses. So we'd go out, and I would pretend I was captain of a great ship. He would stop paddling and pull up his oar as we approached the island, and that canoe would drift in the shadow of history while we watched our bobbers float along the lake. Chokecherry Island was a sacred place, the last stand of the Sioux before the Anishinaabe drove them out of here. A siege that starved out the last of their raiding parties. It was a site for Medewawin society ceremonies, hidden from the Indian agents in the Shamokamonog. I keep going, right? Not far from Chokecherry, there's a monolithic stone jutting out of the water, not unlike a headstone, but alive, Turtle Rock. You are quiet around it. You don't speak around it. You certainly don't touch it with your hand. The Anishinaabe knew the rock, and all this country around it was sacred. The whites also believed in the power of this otherwise unremarkable sliver of shallow lake. The nature and method of that power was a mystery, but it was undeniable, that feeling, that coursing, whenever the boat slid into the inescapable orbit, and I knew immediately, even then, why someone like Joe Beck would be so in thrall of it. I suppose also someone like me. Yeah. I spent a lot of time on that one.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we open up to questions if anyone's got any questions, and you can come to that microphone. You want to come up here, and there's a microphone up here. All right.
Can you elucidate Mack's spiritual journey in terms of joy?
In terms of joy?
Yeah, finding joy.
Are we talking about Mack or are we talking about Mitch, the narrator?
Well, I'm drawn more to Mack, but if you want to talk about Mitch, I personally am drawn to Mack. I don't know why.
And it's funny because I do too. I am also, and I've had a lot of questions about that, about his own spiritual journey. And I don't know if he's in the same space as Mitch in terms of being receptive to the listening. Because with Mitch, I mean, like the experience that I have in terms of my own, like defining my own spirituality and finding some sort of peace with it and being at peace with being distant from it.
Yeah.
It is a personal sort of thing. It's a personal journey, and as I understand it, it's the ability to listen and to listen to the elders and to listen to the experience of being in this space that means so much. And I think that Mack has a certain intuitive belongingness to it.
Yeah.
That he can hear it, but he doesn't even know it, right? So and in that sense, it remains a mystery to him because it's just unexamined. And with Mitch, I mean, it's like the opposite. They're two sides of the same, coin, right? That he is constantly examining, he is constantly questioning. But because he's asking these questions all the time, there's just no other room for any of that other noise, right? To listen to. And one of the really surprising things about the book was as you're picking up on, this empathy that I had for Mack, because he was such an antagonist for so much of it, and he does bad things, to the narrator. Eventually, no spoilers. But I feel like by the end, like I knew him a lot better, and yet I don't know if I can answer that question about where he is with that spirituality, that he does have that capacity for joy, that he has figured out ways to push it away because it's not helping him get power.
I see.
Yeah, but I think there is a certain piece that he does have. Again, I'm careful not to spoil it. With reconnecting with the joy.
Maybe you can explore that in your next work.
I've heard this often too. I was like, I'm supposed to be coming up with a sequel now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
But thank you so much. It was amazing question. Sam.
Oh, hi. I got a quick one. What lessons have you taken away from writing a book that was so directly connected to another one? Like, now that you've done it, now you've been through the process, what have you learned about crafting a novel that is so closely married to another one?
I think without being told, with it being implied, that when I submitted it to other people, because it was nice when it lived up here and it was on my hard drive and nobody had seen it. But when I gave it to somebody else to read, it became very clear that it had to be its own thing. And I was a little bit sensitive about that, because there's a great spiritual debt to these books, not just All the King's Men, but the other ones I was talking to about, and we've talked about this, you and I. The Moviegoer and Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. There are others, but it does have that that debt to it. And paying off that debt means making it its own thing. And I feel like that's what happened, by the end, through the many drafts, it stopped resembling those things so much. And it sort of took off on its own. But in order for it to work, for me anyway, it really had to find what that meant. Where does it diverge? Where does it find its own identity? Because otherwise you're just copying, right?
It's a hard thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. But I wanted to show affinities. I wanted to give a tip of the hat that I'm not wearing to these books that I've loved so much and I've spent so much time in. But I also wanted it to be its own thing.
Cool.
Is my friend Ben? I mean, no, I don't know who this person is at all.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of your earlier work. I think.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
like post 9/11, pre Ithaca period.
Ah,
in
yes,
particular.
yeah, that very specific period. Yes.
So I've been looking out for reviews to see what people are saying about my friend's his book.
Uh-huh.
A lot of them have mentioned like the humor in the book, and that's not a surprise to me. But I wonder, sort of like, what you think about the importance of humor, particularly as dealing with like politics or these sort of situations where we want to tear our hair out based on the things that are happening in our communities and all that. So like, what role does humor play in sort of dealing with that for you?
You know, I look at it like that in terms of irony, right? You know, so not exactly like as humor as in like I'm trying to make a joke here, or you know, some of these things just sort of happen because my focus is on the absurdities. Like my eye just sort of gets drawn to these, you know, dissonances, and you know just how absurd things are, right? You know, in politics, right? You know, as clearly we are going through a very, very, you know, absurd moment, to say the least. But like, you know, and as I was looking at you know the politics on reservations, how often that, you know, it just it appears absurd, right? And how do you deal with that? You know, how do you despair with it, or do you just kind of laugh about it? And I think that that's where a lot of my humor comes from, you know, in the book and in real life as well. But also, I feel like that's such a hallmark of the communities that I know, like the Lac du Flambeau, you know, the reservation there, and a lot of indigenous people is just that's just kind of how we talk, you know, and we tease each other, and we, you know, make fun of each other. We make fun of situations, and most of the time that's good. Sometimes it's hurtful, you know. Sometimes it gets a little much, but it felt like just like such a hallmark of being with my family. And, you know, whenever we would go up to Lac du Flambeau and we'd be sitting around, and you know, how else did we talk? And just, you know, laughing about stuff. So I would feel like it would be very, the absence would be notable if this was a humorless book. And I do hope people find, you know, the humor in it, as you seem to have.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thanks, man.
All right. Well, thanks again for doing this, and thanks for coming out. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out as well. It's so good to see all of you. And these are such wonderful questions. So thank you again.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, man. It's like, oh, yeah, the arc is different.